By the end of this day, 2,977 people would be dead. The world's most powerful nation would be brought to its knees. 2 of the tallest buildings ever constructed would cease to exist. But 24 hours earlier, none of this seemed possible. September 10, 2001 was a Tuesday like any other. People went to work, children went to school, planes took off and landed on schedule. The stock market fluctuated. Traffic jammed the usual streets. In New York City, nearly 50,000 people worked in the Twin Towers. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon operated as the nerve center of American military power. Across the country, airports processed thousands of passengers without incident. That morning, if you had suggested that by this time tomorrow, Lower Manhattan would be covered in ash, that the Pentagon would have a gaping hole in its side, that commercial airliners would be used as weapons, that the American sky would be completely empty of aircraft, you would have been dismissed as paranoid, delusional, impossible. Yet every element was already in motion. 19 men were already in the country. Tickets had been purchased. Final instructions had been given. Surveillance had been completed. The plan, years in development, was entering its final hours. Intelligence agencies had fragments of information. Warnings had been issued. Reports had been filed. But the dots remained unconnected. The signals were lost in the noise. At precisely 8:46 a.m. on September 11th, American Airlines Flight 11 would strike the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 15 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 would hit the South Tower. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 would crash into the Pentagon. At 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 would go down in a Pennsylvania field. But right now, at this moment on September 10th, none of that has happened yet. This is the story of the last 24 hours before everything changed. The final day of the world as it was. September 10th, 2001 represented the end of an era most Americans didn't know they were living in. The Cold War had been over for a decade. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The 1990s had brought unprecedented prosperity. The dot-com boom, despite its recent crash, had created vast new wealth. Unemployment was low. The stock market, though volatile, remained strong. America stood as the world's sole superpower, economically dominant and militarily unchallenged. For most Americans, terrorism was something that happened elsewhere. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing had killed 6 people, but the towers had stood. The memory had faded. Security concerns existed, but they felt abstract, distant, manageable. Airport security was relaxed. Cockpit doors were often left open. Box cutters were allowed on planes. The idea that a commercial airliner could be used as a guided missile simply wasn't part of the national consciousness. Intelligence agencies had been tracking threats. The CIA knew Al-Qaeda was planning something significant. The FBI had received reports about suspicious individuals taking flight training. The NSA had intercepted communications suggesting an imminent attack. But bureaucratic barriers prevented information sharing. Analysts were overwhelmed with data. The specific nature of the threat remained unclear. On September 10th, President George W. Bush was in Florida, preparing for an education event the following day. Vice President Dick Cheney was in Washington. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was at the Pentagon. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani was managing routine city business. None of them knew that within 24 hours, they would be managing the greatest crisis on American soil since Pearl Harbor. The world of September 10th was about to become history. A different world would emerge from the ashes of September 11th. But for now, normalcy continued. September 10th, 2001, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, morning rush hour in New York City. The Twin Towers filled with workers. Elevators carried thousands to their offices. Coffee shops in the lobby served their usual crowds. In Lower Manhattan, the day began like any other Monday follow-up. Meetings were scheduled, emails were sent, phones rang with routine business calls. At Boston's Logan International Airport, Mohammed Atta checked into a hotel near the airport. He had already been in the United States for months, moving between Florida, Maine, and Massachusetts. His pilot's license was valid. His visa was in order. Nothing about his presence raised alarms. In Northern Virginia, 5 more men prepared for their final day of waiting. They had trained at gyms. They had scouted their targets. They had purchased first-class tickets on specific flights. Their selection of September 11th was deliberate. Tuesday morning flights were typically less crowded. The planes would be heavy with fuel for cross-country journeys. At CIA headquarters in Langley, analysts continued processing intelligence reports. The volume was overwhelming. Threats came from dozens of sources. Resources were finite. Prioritization was difficult. A report titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." had been delivered to President Bush on August 6th. It remained one briefing among thousands. At the World Trade Center, building manager Frank DeMartini was overseeing routine maintenance. The towers were designed to withstand the impact of a Boeing 707, the largest plane in common use when they were built. The buildings were considered essentially indestructible. Security personnel screened visitors at lobby checkpoints. But the checkpoints were designed to prevent ground-level attacks, not aerial ones. By 6 p.m., the business day was ending. Workers headed home. The towers began to empty. Cleaning crews prepared for their night shifts. In hotel rooms across the northeastern United States, 19 men prepared for tomorrow. September 10, 2001, 6 p.m. to midnight. The sun set over Manhattan at 7:12 p.m. The Twin Towers lights came on, visible for miles. Evening traffic flowed out of the city. Restaurants filled with dinner crowds. Broadway shows began their performances. Life continued in its familiar rhythm. In Portland, Maine, Mohammed Atta and another hijacker checked into a Comfort Inn. They had driven from Boston. Their connecting flight tomorrow morning would bring them back to Logan Airport, then on to American Airlines Flight 11. At 9:00 p.m., Atta used an ATM. The transaction was recorded. At a hotel near Newark Airport, 4 more hijackers spent their final evening. They ordered room service. They made phone calls. Nothing in their behavior suggested what was coming. In Northern Virginia, 5 men assigned to American Airlines Flight 77 were staying at a motel. One made a final call to his family overseas. He spoke in vague terms. He did not say goodbye. At the National Security Agency, overnight analysts monitored communications intercepts. On September 10th, 2 messages were intercepted. The first, "The match is about to begin." The second, "Tomorrow is 0 hour." Both were in Arabic. Neither was translated until September 12th. At FBI headquarters, an agent in Minneapolis was trying to get authorization to search the laptop of Zacharias Moussaoui, who had been arrested in August after suspicious behavior at a flight school. The request was denied. There was insufficient evidence for a warrant. Across America, families were settling in for the night. Children were doing homework. Parents were watching television. In firehouses throughout New York City, firefighters were changing shifts. At 11 p.m., the night cleaning crews entered the World Trade Center. The buildings never truly emptied. Maintenance workers, security guards, and late-night office workers kept the towers alive around the clock. By midnight, September 11th had arrived. September 11th, 2001, midnight to 6 a.m. The early hours belonged to silence. Most of America slept. The hijackers did not. At 12:30 a.m., surveillance cameras at a Portland ATM captured Mohammed Atta making a final withdrawal. At 1 a.m., he and his companion went to a Walmart. They purchased small items. The transaction was unremarkable. At 2 a.m. they returned to their hotel. They did not sleep much. At 3 a.m. the first airport workers began arriving for early morning shifts. In Boston, New York, and Washington, baggage handlers and gate agents started their preparations. Security screeners took their positions. The system was designed for efficiency, not threat detection. At 4 a.m., cleaning crews finished their night shifts at the World Trade Center. The buildings were as ready as they would ever be for another business day. Fresh coffee was brewing in break rooms. Conference rooms were set up for morning meetings. At 5 a.m., Mohammed Atta and his companion checked out of their Portland hotel. They drove to Portland International Jetport for a 6 a.m. commuter flight to Boston. This connection was tight. If they missed it, the entire operation could collapse. At 5:30 a.m., the other hijackers began moving toward their airports. In New Jersey, 5 men left their hotel for Newark. In Boston, 9 others prepared for Logan. In Virginia, 5 more headed toward Dulles. Some took taxis, others drove rental cars. None drew attention. At 5:45 a.m., the first rays of dawn touched the eastern seaboard. The sky was cloudless. Visibility was perfect. Weather conditions were ideal for flying. Meteorologists would later describe it as one of the most beautiful September mornings in years. At 6 a.m., Atta's flight departed Portland on time. The first piece was in motion. There was no turning back now. 6 a.m. to 8:46 a.m., the final hours of the old world. At 6:45 a.m., Mohammed Atta's commuter flight landed at Boston Logan Airport. He and his companion cleared security without incident. Their bags, however, were flagged by a new automated screening system. The bags were held. They would be loaded only if the passengers boarded. This security measure was designed to prevent bombs placed by passengers who didn't intend to be on the plane. It did not account for suicide attackers. At 7:15 a.m., workers began arriving at the World Trade Center. Elevators filled. Coffee carts in the plaza did brisk business. The morning was unusually clear and warm. At 7:35 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 began boarding at Logan's Gate B-32. It was a Boeing 767 bound for Los Angeles. Atta and 4 other hijackers boarded, along with 76 other passengers and 11 crew members. At 7:40 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 began boarding at nearby Gate C-19, another 767 to Los Angeles. 5 hijackers boarded with 51 other passengers and 9 crew members. At 7:50 a.m. at Dulles Airport outside Washington, American Airlines Flight 77 began boarding. A Boeing 757 to Los Angeles. 5 hijackers joined 53 passengers and 6 crew members. At 8 a.m. at Newark Airport, United Airlines Flight 93 began boarding. A 757 to San Francisco. 4 hijackers boarded with 33 passengers and 7 crew members. At 8:14 a.m., Flight 11 received its final communication from air traffic control. Climb and maintain flight level 280. The response was routine. At 8:42 a.m., a flight attendant on Flight 11 reached an American Airlines ground manager by phone. She reported a hijacking in progress. At 8:46 a.m. and 40 seconds, American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower between floors 93 and 99. The impact was recorded by seismographs as far away as Pennsylvania. Within 102 minutes, both towers had collapsed. The Pentagon was burning. Flight 93 had crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, brought down by passengers who fought back. 2,977 people were dead. The death toll exceeded Pearl Harbor. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in human history, and the deadliest incident ever for firefighters and law enforcement officers, with 343 and 72 killed, respectively. By noon, American airspace was completely empty for the first time in history. Every commercial flight was grounded. President Bush was aboard Air Force One, moving between secure locations. The government initiated continuity of operations protocols. The world watched in real time as the towers fell. Every major network canceled regular programming. The images were broadcast globally, repeatedly, endlessly. Stock markets closed, borders were sealed, military bases went to highest alert. In the days that followed, the political landscape transformed. Congress passed the USA Patriot Act. The Department of Homeland Security was created. Airport security became federalized. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq began. Guantanamo Bay detention camp opened. Surveillance expanded dramatically. The world divided into before and after September 11th. The towers were never rebuilt as they were. The site became Ground Zero, then the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. The freedom that defined pre-9/11 America never fully returned. The reflexive trust was gone. The sense of invulnerability was shattered. 24 years later, every aspect of modern life still bears the imprint of that day. Security screenings, military deployments, political divisions. A generation has now grown up knowing nothing else. But those who remember September 10th know what was lost when those planes took off. This was day falling. One day, everything changes.